Okay, let's get started. So I have the pleasure of introducing, I can take this off the top, the other Connie, who is referred to, well, I'm the other Connie to Leslie, but I call this one the other Connie. So Connie's worked in the go ahead.
I'm the other Connie, that's for sure.
Connie's worked in the natural gas pipeline industry for 37 years and has served in multiple leadership roles during that time. He's currently a senior operations director for energy transfer in North Little Rock, Arkansas. In addition to his work, Connie and his family have devoted a great deal of time over the past 22 years volunteering for the Children's Tumor Foundation in honor of their daughter, Katie. Connie and his wife, Leslie, have hosted numerous fundraising events as well as participated in the NF Endurance team. And Connie is looking forward to helping others learn about their leadership styles and providing tools to help us know ourselves to lead ourselves. So I'll leave it to you.
All right, very good. We'll get started. So I'm going to start really with a question. How many people in the room are leaders? How many of you influence thought? You got to raise your hand now. Everyone influences thought. Let me define that a little bit. It defines leadership. Sometimes people think that leadership equates to authority. Okay? Leadership doesn't really equate to authority. Leadership really is about influencing the thoughts and actions of others. And what we're doing here in the Children's Tumor Foundation is attempting to influence thoughts and actions of others to support the mission to end NF. So all of us, by the definition of influencers, are leaders. Whether we have authority of any sort or not, everyone is a leader in their own way. And so we want to talk about building leadership skills, and when we're going to influence people, make it worthwhile so that people will actually follow the lead that you're taking. I always like to start with this slide. It's a little bit of an icebreaker. I learned this stuff back in 2014, 2015, and after I learned the information, one of the things I wanted to do was take it home to Leslie, to my wife. And so this slide helped us a little bit. So we talked about provisional, plan, and promise. Provisional is really something that, as a creative person, it's an idea, a thought, or something like that that you might just throw out there for someone to consider, while creative people talk in a provisional manner. And so that's what that's about. A plan is something that you lay out that gives you a path, a start point, an end point, and all the steps in between to accomplish a goal, whatever that may be. Now, when you do a plan, it doesn't mean that everything's going to happen exactly the way it was written in that plan. It just means that that was the plan. So things may wiggle and change and move as you move through the plan. A promise is something different. When you promise something to an individual, that is an absolute commitment. Never back up on a promise. So my daughter's in here today, and I'm going to give you an example of that. Whenever Katie was 12, 13, 14 years old, in that age range, she was doing a lot of things in theater. And as the dad, sometimes they needed adult participants in the plays that Katie was participating in. And if I promised Katie I was going to be there for the play and participate in that play, as a father, it would be an absolute miss to not be there. When you promise your 12-year-old daughter you're going to be there, you better be there. There were times, however, when we were doing the theater stuff that I couldn't make that promise for practices and things of that nature. And I would say, Katie, listen, I plan to be there this week for the 2 rehearsals, but I may not be able to make it. You know, my schedule and work may not permit that. And I had to have her understand that, so that if I had to miss, although I planned to be there, it was okay. And I was going to make that up, and we were going to be all right. But I could never give her a promise and then not show for that promise. So I explained all this to Leslie, and she looked at it and said, well, just so you know, anything I promise after 2 glasses of wine doesn't count. And that was the message. So anyway, that's one of my favorite little slides. It's something to keep in mind, especially when you're dealing with people who are very creative in nature and are thinking about the future, very future oriented. Understanding provisional is really important because as planners, we go straight to plan. We don't think about the creative process being just that. Into the course now, we'll talk about competencies, connectivity, self-awareness. Really, this is starting the discussion about knowing yourself to lead yourself, which is at the root or the base of what we're going to learn and talk about here today. All of us have certain competencies. Those are the skills that you may have, whatever they may be. If you're a lawyer, you've got some skill in that area, and you have the ability to read and understand documents and write documents and correspond in that way. If you're a good cook, then you have skill in that area, and you're able to put together recipes, build upon those recipes, improve them, things of that nature. Those are skills or competencies that you have. Connectivity is how you connect with the rest of the world. That's how you communicate. It's how you're effective in knowing the other, whoever the other may be, or groups of people. And then self-awareness is really how you see yourself and how you perceive yourself in the other two areas. Am I effective in my skill area? Am I effective in my connectivity? Am I self-aware enough to actually make changes, improve, adjust tendencies that I may have as a person? And in the middle, it talks about the core. When all those things are in balance, you become a better person, a better leader, and more influential in the things you're trying to achieve. So this is really just know yourself to lead yourself is one of the mantras you'll hear me talk about a lot today. And this just kind of lays that out in a visual form so that you can see it. The reality is, as we journey through life, we are constantly growing and changing as time moves on and as we gain experiences. And so you're always kind of following this infinity loop. As we live in the world, we live in some reality. And we each know what our reality is and how we behave in that world. And then if you follow that infinity loop, we all have tendencies. It's how we behave as people in the world. And we pretty much know our own tendencies. Those tendencies lead to patterns that lead to actions, what we actually physically do. And then those actions lead to consequences. They can be good consequences or bad consequences, but it's who we are. And we continually go around that loop as humans on the planet. What we want to make sure we do is that we know ourselves well enough to identify those tendencies and then be able to lead yourself to adjust or change those tendencies where you believe it's needed based on your experiences in life. This slide really is speaking to, if you just follow the other slide. Once you identify tendencies that you have in your own life and how you're doing things, you really have to call that out, take ownership of that tendency. You're really writing notes at this point about your own tendencies and what you want to change, how you're going to respond to that, and then how you're going to execute that response and when. And it's really important to understand the how and the when piece of it. This is what I'm going to do. It's as simple as that, and this is when I'm going to do it. And set a deadline. Really do execute on those changes. So how many of you got to take the test online? So you probably came to a page, something like this. Did you guys see this page? So once you took your test, it called out what was natural to you and the type of voice you have. We're going to talk a lot about voices here in the next few slides. I just took a snapshot of mine. I hadn't taken this test in a long time, so I went out and redid it so I would have this screen. I am a nurturer, connector, guardian. That's how my voices line up, okay? And it gives me information about what's normal for me at the top, and then as you scroll down, it gives information about things I might need to work on. So we suggested growth opportunities are tentative tendencies that are out there for me. well, I'll read that, and you have the ability to evaluate for yourself if this is spot on or not. These tests, really, it takes a little more flushing out than we're going to be able to do today to say if those are exactly what your personalities are or not. But they're generally pretty close. So when I read that, I can say whether these tendencies are right or not, and if I need to make some changes. And, you know, I know that some of these are right, and they're things that I've worked on over time. Those go into that affinity loop, and now I'm going to own it and then make adjustments down the road to improve my own behavior. So I'd be sure to read through that. That's really good information. And if you notice on that page through Giant Worldwide, there were some really good videos too. If you didn't have a chance to go through those, I do recommend those as well. There's kind of another piece when you're working through knowing yourself to lead yourself up, just refer to it as intentional or accidental. A lot of folks go through life and don't really pay attention or don't become self-aware of their own behaviors. And so everything that happens is somewhat accidental. There's no intent or intention in how they're doing what they do day in and day out. And so really, to fix that, you first address your own tendencies and then work those, as you change those things, work that out into your family, your team, your organization, and your community. That's applying what you learn about yourself to others so that you're better able to connect and influence the thought of others. Talking about the tests, too, there are really components that make up how we behave year in and year out. As we grow older, those can change. The intent of the test is really to identify what type of voice you have by your nature. All of us are really born with some gifts, some with a kind of a natural voice, but as we grow and age and have experiences in life, those experiences we have influence our voice. And that is referred to as nurture. So how you were raised, you know, I'm very familiar with people now that were raised in like in an orphanage or in homes, things of that nature, or that had, you know, parents that had issues. I've met folks that are going down that path. And so the way they were raised may not have been the best in what you would want folks to have. All those experiences influence their behavior. And until they become self-aware of that nurture component, how the world has affected them, it's very hard to correct those tendencies. So being self-aware is very important. And then when you look at the test and think, well, I don't really think that way, or my tendencies are a little different from that, it could actually be because of what you experience in your world, in your environment, from the day you were born to this very moment. And then at the end of the day, we all have a choice. Once we are self-aware and we understand our own tendencies, we can choose to act differently. That's not always easy, but it is something we can do. And that's what the infinity loop is about. Any questions so far? If you have one, just raise your hand. Talking about how the world influences who we are and our own behavior in the world. These are some of the oughts and shoulds. And really, I kind of was working through that: role models, the school you attended, male, female, success, failures you may have had in your life, dreams, early life experiences. Authority figures can be very influential, parenting and how that works. So these are just some of the oughts and shoulds, or some of the things that drive how we are nurtured through life. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is to be a leader and what you want to work toward. This graphic, we call it the support challenge matrix, kind of lays out, and then if you've worked, or even if you are in school and have had instructors, they may fit into one of these quadrants. Really what we want to focus on is moving towards being a liberating leader in your culture and in whatever environment or whatever you're trying to achieve in your life, being in that group. We all act as one of the others at times, and depending on our personality, maybe one of the others is dominant. So we'll talk about each one. The dominant person, or sometimes it's the pioneer voice that kind of has this. they tend to create a culture of fear and manipulation. And so they're typically the boss or the other, whoever it may be, that says you got to do this or else. And they lead through fear. So the or else is, if you don't get this done, I'm going to fire you. Or if you don't get this done, you're going to, when you were a kid, you're going to lose your phone forever. And it's something harsher than you would expect. And that's how a dominator behaves. And they do that whether, they're dealing with children or adults. And really, at the end of the day, if you're working or if have that dominator personality, you lose traction and you lose those that are closest to you or trying to help you out. Can't really do that day in and day out. Then there's the one on the top left is about being a protector, a culture of entitlement and mistrust. Leaders that use this method generally kind of give away the shop. So rather than having expectations for work to be done or for whatever it is that needs to be accomplished, they don't really push that. A little more apathetic, and at the end of the day, they don't accomplish their goals, and their people become entitled and really don't trust the leadership at the end of the day. And an abdicator is none of the above. Really just apathy, don't even set the expectations out there for people to achieve. And what we want to work toward is being liberating leaders. A little bit more on leadership and what you want to look for. Leaders who call people out, and many times this can even be public. They're not the kind of folks you want to follow or be as leaders. We want to call people up and empower them to be effective in their job. And it's an important thing to know about yourself and how you behave with people to understand if you're calling people out or calling people up. So really what we're trying to do is fight for the highest possible good of the life in the lives of those that we lead day in and day out, have a positive influence. And, when we're doing the work that we do here with the foundation, it really is imperative that we do that. The words I like to use associated with this are, I am for you. When we speak to people and we deal with people out in the public and use language that puts you in the position of being for the other, that's where you get the win. That's when you start liberating and empowering. I'll keep the word I am for you in mind anytime you're speaking to the other. We're going to get into the voice order a little bit more now. This is just, again, an example of whenever I went out and took the test. If you haven't, definitely want to do this. And this is what it looks like. And the voice order that came up for me. Be sure and again just read through that material. I just wanted to see the example. You have to click on the buttons to see that. Go ahead. Right. So you should be able to scroll down, and then there's a little. There are like 3 different or 4 different topics that will be covered. Right beside where it says what was your voice? What was your top one? A connector. So right to the right of connector, it should be voice pairings, I believe is the terminology used. And you can see your other voices. So, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, so you may want to have that pulled up. This is what once you click on that button, this is what you should see. And it starts giving you more detail. So you're going to see when you click on that it references all 5 of the voices that are available, starting with nurture, or actually it'll start with whichever one is your primary, and then it'll list the others in order. All of us use all 5 of these voices at some point in time. No one is just exclusively, really exclusively just uses 1 or 2 of the voices as they're communicating and living, in the world. But everyone has a primary, a secondary, and a third by nature, by the way you were born and built. And so I'll talk about each one because it makes a difference which one is first. So the first one I'll talk about is nurture. Nurturers typically are quieter, folks that whose voices are not heard very well. They have to really work to project and to insert what they want out in the world into the world, okay? They're generally quieter. The creative voice, sometimes they're hard to hear, but it's because they're so far ahead of the other folks in the room that it's hard to conceptualize. And there are not a high number of folks who really have a strong creative first voice. And everyone else in the room, in many cases, has either a guardian voice or a nurturer voice or a pioneer voice. And as soon as the creative starts talking about what they want to accomplish and how, everybody else starts planning the work. And so they don't really always listen to or hear the whole concept. The guardian voice, how many people know somebody that just asks a million questions and it drives you absolutely bananas? That's the guardian, okay? So the guardians really, when you're building your team, if you don't have a guardian, it's a mistake. You got to have a guardian on your team to ask those hard questions. They're really difficult to bring forward for a creative, especially, and to get engaged in the conversation. So if you have a guardian voice, it means you're going to be the person in the room that asks all the right questions that nobody else wants to address. And it can be very, very hard if you're that guardian. And if you're on the other side of the guardian, sometimes it's very hard to listen to those questions. But the questions are important, and we need to take note of that. It's how you receive the questions that becomes important. We'll talk a little more about that. The connector is the person in the room, and we kind of, everybody's on social media these days. You can kind of see the connector. The connector is going to have 2,500 friends, whatever the max is on social media for whatever platform they're on. And that's who they are. They like to connect and be connected to the world around them and the people around them. And that's really where they stand out. The pioneer is going to be the person who walks in the room, says, here's my idea, here's how we're going to do it, and nobody else gets to talk. They're very driven. Oftentimes they are in positions of authority because of that drive that they have. A lot of times they're right. They're generally have some expertise that's really strong. But the flaw in it is their voice is so strong and so loud. When they come into the room with that power, they don't hear anyone else. They don't hear the nurturer's perspective. They don't hear the creative's perspective. They don't listen to the questions the guardian has. And then they're not going to connect with others. And they don't listen to the connector. So pioneers have to really be careful with that. If they want to be effective leaders, put a team together with those voices, and they need to change that tendency so their ears work and they can hear the other voices, because those other voices will help them be successful, and they really want success. They just have a tendency to believe that they know how to get to that successful end. So just information here. And this is interesting information, because when you're dealing with a group of people, understanding what the group looks like is important. Nurturers make up about 43% of people in the world, okay? So anytime you're addressing a crowd, about 43% of the people in the crowd or in your group potentially are nurturers. That's nearly half. Nurturers, when you're talking to them, their first concern about whatever it is you're presenting is, how does it affect the people? So it's important to understand that. And they're going to be about half of your audience typically. Creatives make up about 10% of the population, 9% of the population. So there are fewer creatives. The hard part about that is when you're building a team, you need a creative. You got to seek that out, because it can help you think of great ideas to go with down the road. Guardians, again, a high population of guardians. 30% of the people in the world have that guardian voice. And so it won't be unusual as you get into activities where you're going to influence people to lead for a guardian to be present and to have a lot of questions. What's important when you're preparing or working in a leadership role is that you take the questions in. And it's also important to know that you don't have to answer them all right then. and it's not a personal attack, especially if you're a nurturer. Connectors make up about 11%. Connectors can help you grow your network of people. They connect people to people. They like to do that. And once they have connected them, they like to get credit for it. The connector connects a group of people or a few people, and they'll never hear back that, man, that connection really helped me out. That's a disappointment for them, for sure. So it's something to pay attention to when you're working with someone who's strong and as a connector. And a pioneer, they're only 7% of the count, so there are not as many, but when they're pushing their ideas, they are very, very good champions. They're pushing things forward and over the edge, to success. I mean, they are very driven to get their work done, very focused on strategy, strategic visions, the results. They just got to work their ears a little bit more and they'll have greater success. A pioneer can, if you're working with a group that has a pioneer voice in it, the pioneer voice can take out all the other voices. So if you get in that situation and you're facilitating conversation and you know you've got someone with that strong of a voice, it's a good idea before the session to pull the pioneer aside and say, listen, you've got some great ideas. I appreciate the strategy and vision you're bringing to the table. Today, go last for me, and let's see how this works out. And it will be really, really good. And then we're going to have to get somebody else in the room to go first because they're going to all be tapping their toe waiting on the pioneer to speak. So there are two charts in here. I think this is going to get sent out. These are just for reference. If you've ever done a Berkman or anything of that nature, the nurture, guardian, creative, connector voices kind of tie to those letters. And so these are just some insights into what your voice might typically look like if you're familiar with those letters. It's a tie back, basically. Now I've got some documents I'm going to share, and yeah, you can pass them out. I need one of each or 2 pages. And those letters correlate to those documents, and you kind of read about the different personality components, and I think you'll find that very helpful. We're not going to have time to work through those today, but it is helpful. The next slide is really the same thing, just it's just reference. The reference works just a little bit different, and I thought some people might like seeing it this way a little bit better. But the voice is definitely tied to those letters. I am an ESFJ, the bottom to the right, and nurture, connector, guardian. And so as you look at this, if you're a guardian, first voice, connector, second voice, the letters are ESTP. Guardian connector is easier to remember, but I think that you will like being able to look at these sheets of paper and relate those to the letters as well. And again, I think everybody's going to get a copy of this, so you'll be able to read it, kind of look it over. We talked a little bit about this already. Whenever you're building a team or you're starting to put things together with a group, how you build that team. For real success, it lists all the voices at the top. That team organization and the advisory group, you need to have a little bit of all the above. You need each of those voices on your team, and it's ideal. That takes some facilitation too when you build it so that everyone gets to talk, but it can lead to great success. For the most part, if you're trying to lead change or lead someone to a point, if you don't have that, if you have silos, turf wars, no advisory group, or you're just saying, hey, this is my baby, I'm doing it my way, a lot less likely to find success. And so it's something to keep in mind when you're building a team. Some key differences between the pioneer, creative, and connector voice and the guardian, nurturer voices. If you're trying to start something new and move it forward, the pioneer, creative, and connector, they're going to look at the vision, and if they like it, they're going to say, man, that is a great idea. Let's just start. Let's figure out a way to get this done. But they may not have a plan for how to get it done. Likely don't have a plan for how to get it done. The guardians and nurturers in your group, when they see the vision, they like the vision, but they need a bridge. They need to understand what the plan is, what the steps are to move forward in the endeavor, whatever it may be. They're just not going to come as soon as the Pioneer Creative and Connectors. Once the bridge is built, and they'll help you build the bridge, then they're going to get it done and be very good at implementation of that vision, whatever it is, and helpful in that. This is a slide I like to share in general. Just it's about the power of medium when you're talking to people. Sometimes folks don't understand when you don't get the message. And you know, I didn't do this study. The folks at Giant did this study and came up with a slide. I agree with it 100%, and it's about what's effective in communication. And one of the, I guess, mediums we use is social media. A lot of folks think I posted it on Facebook, everyone's going to see it. Well, the algorithms aren't going to allow that to happen. And the reality is, although it's kind of fun and neat and cute, it's really only about 5% effective based on this study. Text messages are a little bit more effective, but not everyone will read a long text message. And so it kind of depends on the content, but if you're really trying to get something done, not generally effective. How many of you read all of the emails you get every day? Nobody does. How many of you, if you open an email and it has more than 3 sentences, read all the way to the bottom? A few people do, but it's not many. A lot of people will not go that far. And then I deal with executives at times, and if you got more than 3 sentences for one of an executive, you can forget it. It's over with. So it's just not as effective as people tend to think. You'll hear people say, "Oh, well, I sent an email." You know, it's not as effective as you would like for it to be. Phone calls, the verbal conversation, one-to-one, tend to be more effective. Now, if you want to make sure that the thoughts are heard and understood, you can do the phone call, follow it with an email, and that becomes more effective. And in the phone call, say, "Hey, I'm gonna follow this up with an email so you have the key points." That becomes more effective. All of us have been on video chats in the last 2 or 3 years. It's become much more effective and useful. Many of us are working all across the country. So Zoom, Teams, WebEx, whatever application you use, when you do video chat, and I mean turn the video on, you've got to do that part, turn the video on, it becomes much more effective because you can see facial expressions and in general body language that you don't see with just verbal communication, and that you get none of with email or text. And so it does become more effective. And this slide was prepared pre-COVID. I would say that is more effective today than it was even pre-COVID. I think we've gotten, those of us who are working, across the country are getting pretty proficient in video chat, but you do have to turn the video on. Whoever's speaking needs to have their camera on because body language means so much. It does make a difference. And if you really want to get it done, it's in person. In person is still the most effective way to communicate. You can follow that up with an email to cover the facts, make sure we're on the same page. But in our world, especially if you're into fundraising for the foundation, that one-on-one personal contact or group personal contact is much, much more effective than any of the other methods. And I think for us, that's really important to know when we're doing work for the foundation. Uh-oh. There we go. I may have skipped forward more than one. No, I didn't. Okay, so this kind of follows on to having those personal conversations and how that works. And this is an important slide. If you're just meeting someone or you're trying to build a relationship and you're going to ask for a donation, and which we do a lot with the foundation, there's relationship to be built. So when you first meet someone, everything is very transactional, and the other doesn't know you so well at first meeting. And their tendency is going to be, okay, I'm going to listen, but I'm in self-preservation mode. I'm not real sure just what they want or how much they want, what commitment this person is going to need from me. And although they may be kind and forthcoming in a meeting, because they don't know you, they're going to preserve. They're going to be a little bit careful to not overextend. It takes time to build relationships, and that's over in this gap, to have true influence so that the curtain drops on self-preservation. They know over time, through relationship building, that you are trustworthy and you're telling them right information about what this foundation is about or whatever you're trying to influence in your life. And as that curtain drops and the self-preservation drops, you're going to gain more access and more ability to work with that individual, gain their trust. And, if it's a donation we're seeking, to improve upon what we can actually receive. And it also gives you the ability to extend how long those asks last, how long that ask or that whatever you're asking for is going to go. If the wall stays up and it remains transactional, it may be one and done. And so the importance of relationship is a heavy factor in being successful. This is when we start talking about self-preservation, just talks a little bit about what it is. It really is, what is the other afraid of losing? So, if you're asking them to cut a check and you want $100,000 and they've only got 125, they're going to preserve. It's going to, have an effect. You have to think about it that way. What am I trying to hide? In some cases, people don't want others to know what it is that's keeping them from cooperating or moving forward. And then what am I trying to prove to who? And in some cases that has a deciding factor in why they're preserving, why they're not coming forth and doing what you need to do. This is a good study. Self-preservation drives a lot of decisions about what we will do for self-preservation or what we won't do to make sure we maintain our self-preservation. We talked about nature and nurture a little bit earlier. This kind of links to that. I've heard Leslie had to step out, but I've heard Leslie say many times that she doesn't like asking people for money. And she doesn't. She hates doing that. And it's not really a prohibition. It's not something that anyone has ever told her or restricted her from doing. It's an inhibition that comes from her nature. And so she never asked for donations. Instead, she asked for help for the foundation. She changes the language. That's how she has to do her ask. She will not walk into a room and tell somebody, I need you to give me a $10,000 donation. She's just not built that way. There's an inhibition around that. But she can walk in and say, hey, I'm with the Children's Tumor Foundation and we need your support. And then start talking about how we need this support. And it ultimately comes the same way, but it's done with different language. And how you use language really does that. If you have an inhibition about what you're trying to achieve, change the thinking process for how you are going to achieve it. I heard a little bit of the marketing presentation today, and inhibition comes in many times when you're talking about marketing efforts. If somebody walked into me and said, hey, I want you to be the marketing developer for XYZ, I just, my hands are going up, no way, I'm not doing that. But if they come in and say, listen, I want you to influence thought and help me to develop a campaign to change the world, and here's how, I'm all in. That changes the language of how you do the ask, and it removes that inhibition. I think my battery's going dead. maybe over here. All right, and this is an important part. So we started really talking about self and how we're going to develop self. This kind of draws us right back to that. And it's something to really think about when you're identifying your own tendencies and what you want to work on in life. And it is, what's it like to be on the other side of me? And, if you look at yourself in a mirror from the perspective of how do I treat others, how do I behave towards others, what does that look like? Am I reactive? Am I accidental in how I lead my life and how I behave? And am I inconsistent in how I behave and how I show up? Or am I proactive, very much intentional and consistent? Focus on those things, because if you've got something in the box on the left, those are tendencies to address in your own behaviors to improve your leadership style as a leader or someone who wants to influence. Being reactive, accidental, and inconsistent will stop progress. It will stop you in your tracks. But if you are seen as proactive, intentional, and very consistent in your behavior, that's going to help you move forward. And then again, at the end of the day, I am for you. We want to liberate people to lead in a very positive way. Messaging should always be set up so that you're telling the other, even if you're giving them critical feedback, I am for you. So if you're having one of those difficult conversations, and you can couch it in a manner that says, I am for you, you're better off. So has anybody ever had to go through a performance review? Can you give me an example of a bad one?
Ours or giving it to someone else?
Either way.
I was told that I was too emotional, and you can see every emotion on my face.
Okay, so that happens, and so you're probably a nurturer.
Yes.
And you probably are like an FJ in the letters, in the last two letters. Yeah. And so that's not uncommon for folks who are nurturers. I'm a nurturer. It's not uncommon for one to take things very personal and to express those emotions outwardly. And sometimes those emotions come out and they affect your ability to use logic to get to a decision or to meet an end. And sometimes managers don't know how to deal with that. And so, if I was going to address that emotional component, it would be better to use language like, listen, let me see if I can do this and do it right. You're challenging me now. Emotions play an important role in our life. Rini, say your name right, Rini. Emotions play an important role in our lives. And sometimes to be better at what we are going to do, or to be more proactive in how we're going to deal with others, it's good to set those. Actually, the way I would probably say it is to write down what you're feeling before you have to go do what you have to do, and then make some determination about how much that should apply to the decision being made. And then sometimes when for me, sometimes when I have an emotional response to something like Reenie's talking about, I have to stop and give myself some space to let that settle so that I can let logic have a play. So that, and in Reenie's case, Reenie can be successful in her business and what she's trying to achieve. And that's what I want for you as a boss or a leader of success. And so the key is to present the topic in a manner that leaves everyone understanding that I want you to be successful. So sometimes we have to put our emotions in a box, so to speak, through some method, whatever method works for you, so that you can be successful. Is that helping? Is that okay? I didn't hammer you. I didn't want to hammer you. Yeah.
You didn't say there are no performance, which is how it was presented to me.
Yeah. Well, and so that's kind of I work in the pipeline industry, and so and I mostly work with men. I work with women as well. But when you start talking about field technicians that are pulling wrenches and yada, 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 and you've already done these surveys, 43% of those guys are nurturers. Now, they may not want to admit it, but they are. So others, and any other question, I don't know how I'm doing on time, so.
I've been told that I'm too sociable and I talk too much.
Okay, so that's a tendency. Do you agree with it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so give me a little bit more about how you believe that can be corrected.
Oh. Learning to recognize when to stop, learning to kind of break that down and go, oh, I've moved away from being productive into just being sociable. So I need to step back and go back into productivity.
Yeah, and I want to, for strong extroverts, how many strong extroverts, or do you know? I know Katie is a strong extrovert. Any other strong extroverts in the room? So when you look at your personality, the videos and things that are associated with this on the test we just took, there's some good advice for those who are strong extroverts. And the reality is to be your best self, to have others be for you, because you want them to be for you, an extrovert needs to learn to appreciate silence. And it may be brief silence, but for an extrovert, silence is deafening. I can't stand it. It's very, very difficult. That's just a personality trait. But just in you recognizing that trait allows you to change the tendency. And the key is for any tendency to recognize it, train yourself to recognize it in the moment and make the adjustment so you have a different consequence. This is actually, I think, our last slide. So I'm going to go back to. Okay, I'm going to go back to that slide. Katie needs to take that through this circle to change her consequences, the bottom line. So I think we're out of time, it sounds like, so I appreciate everybody's time. I hope this was helpful.